A lot coming up today as we are on the brink of war. It looks like. I'll talk with Kareem Sadjupur of the Carnegie Endowment in hour number 3 today on the Hugh Hewitt Show. So watch the Salem News Channel, listen to the Salem Radio Network. But I begin today, and our great radio affiliates, I don't want to forget them. But I begin today with Jim Garrity. He is, of course, National Review senior writer. He's, of course, host of the Three Martini Lunch. He's, of course, a contributor to the Editors podcast by National Review. And he's the father of Robot Boys. And so I don't know if he's smart, but his wife must be. The Robot Boys interest me a lot more than you, Jim, but someday they'll come on and talk to me about what they're up to. Have they been set back? Can they get a robot to shovel the snow?
That has not done that. But this has been, here in Fairfax County, where they are metaphorical snowflakes over literal snowflakes. We got real snow, and we were shoveling out Sunday in between the football games, and there was, like in our driveway, there was still like a layer of ice on top of everything else. So schools were closed Monday. That was a guarantee. Wednesday's a half day. Thursday and Friday are off because it's the end of the quarter and the grading period. So off Monday, schools cancel get Tuesday. Tuesday afternoon, they're like, what are we doing? There's no way we're sending the kids for half a day for the week. You're off Wednesday too. So usually my son is like thrilled, yay, snow days. No, wants to get into the school to work on the robot.
On the robots.
Schedule. Yeah. The first competitions are in like end of February. So, they get the assignment in January. This year, the robot's going to have to like take a ball, probably about the size like a volleyball, slightly smaller, and shoot it up into a basket. And the question, you get points for how well your robot can do that. It also has to go over a ramp. This is the first robotics competition for anybody out there who's like, what is this, bizarre thing that my kids get into and get really competitive about? So they're into it, but they have to, they got like one more month. They have the design, they have the basics, they got the robot that can roll around by remote control and stuff. It's got to be autonomous for, I think, 30 seconds this year. They increased that. So you program in the software. The robot's got to be able to do it by itself for the first 30 seconds. Or else you're not scoring any points for the first 30 seconds of like a 2-minute, 30-second competition period. So they got their work cut out for them and couldn't go in, any day this week, which is making things a little more complicated for them.
Wouldn't it make sense if the robotics advisor came and opened one door and let the robotics kids in?
Hugh, that is an intense topic of discussion. I'll just put it there. And I don't want to get the illustrious faculty advisor, who's a terrific guy. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. So right. Nobody starts snooping around one particular Authenticity Awards High School.
Okay, good enough. All right, Jim, let's get serious. War or no war? What do you think?
Well, it certainly seems like we've got more and more forces going into that region. I had been frustrated that both on your program in early January and then a little bit more than 2 weeks ago, President Trump had gone on Truth Social, encouraged the Iranian people to rise up. He says, keep track of who the torturers are. Help is on the way. MEGA, and I assume that means, make Iran great again. And I was very supportive of that. That's what I wanted to see the president do. And then time went by and not much has happened. Now, some of this was getting the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group out to the Persian Gulf. Oh, by the way, I saw news that Iran, China, and Russia plan on doing joint naval exercises in that neighborhood in the coming days. Hugh, do you think the timing of that joint naval exercise is a coincidence?
No, but I'm also not particularly worried about the Chinese and the Russian navies getting together. I'm afraid what they'll do is run into each other. They might hit us by accident, but if the Ukrainians can say... Remember the Ukrainians sunk the Moscow?
You know why the Iranian Navy has glass-bottom boats, right?
Yeah, Operation Praying Mantis.
Well, I was going to say that way they can see the old Iranian Navy.
Okay, but I think something's going off here. I'm just on record. What do you think?
I think the president, it would look really bad if nothing happened. Now, I want to point out that we have a variety of ways to undermine the Iranian regime. Could be cyber, could be covert action. I think getting as many Starlink links and other ways to get communications going on would be helpful. I think trying to jam the communications or disrupt the communications of the Iranian regime might be helpful to the people trying to overthrow the regime. So I'm hoping we're doing something already, and I'm hoping that there is more to come because, as I'm sure your listeners know, Hugh, the estimates of the death tolls among the protesters, some have it in the 10,000 range, some have it closer to 20,000, some as high as 30,000. That's like 10 times 9/11. Like the death toll in
It's bigger than
Iran.
anything since Babi Yar in World War One, when
Yeah.
the Nazis wiped out 33,000 Jews in Ukraine in 2 days. It's the biggest 2 day massacre since then. Unthinkable. But Jim, I have talked, I think, to pretty much every Iran expert inside the Beltway over the last 2 weeks since the president made his remarks on this show. And they all tell me that you cannot bomb the IRGC out of power. They're too deeply dug in. All you can do is create conditions of extreme opportunity for the street if it takes that opportunity. They may be too shocked. What do you think?
Well, I used open source intelligence shortly after the president's comments to look at which parts of the IRGC are most involved in doing things like putting down protesters, riot control, that kind of stuff. And then I figured out, again, through open source intelligence, I don't have any spies working me for anything like that, where those facilities are located. So when I wrote about the president, like 2 weeks have gone by since the president said help is on the way. What's the deal here? What's going on? Some people said, Jim, you can't criticize the president without saying what he should do. Well, I give everything short of the coordinates and the street addresses for these locations, and I kind of have this feeling that if the aspects of the IRGC that are most involved in bringing the protest, if their barracks suddenly explode, that's not going to help morale any. That's not going to help, and I figure that'd be a great shot in the arm for the protesters. Now, is it a legitimate concern about if the Americans help, does the regime then say, they're all the tools of the Americans, they're all the tools of the Israelis? Yeah, but the regime is going to say that anyway. Like, I think we should
And nobody believes the regime. That's the one thing
Yeah,
I take away is that
do.
there is no support for the regime inside of Iran. None.
Yeah. The other thing, and I know other guests on your program are likely to talk about this today, the main impetus behind these protests and this uprising is that the Iranian economy is a mess. The currency is becoming, completely devalued. We think we got problems with inflation in this country. It's way, way worse in Iran, right? So even if they can somehow kill a whole bunch of people, and even if they can somehow, stamp down every Iranian who dares raise their voice, you're still stuck with the economic problems. And this regime is not going to be able to fix that. It would require wholesale changes in all of their policies that, and they'd have to deal with corruption and they'd have to deal with all the bad loans. Like, there's really no way for them to get out of this. So one way or another, the Iranian regime can't continue the way it is. The question is, do they hang on by their fingernails for as long as possible after, a bloodbath of massacring protests? Or do we give them a little shove and somebody else gets to run the show and we hope that they have where they're more amenable to our long-term vision as, something, and with the long-term prosperity of the Iranian people?
I had Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery on yesterday. He's actually run a strike group, and he's retired. He ran through the amount of firepower we have and the number of defensive forces we put in there. But he also noted they're not a regime for walking away. If it begins this time, It's not just a discrete and insular target that the nuclear facilities at Fordo were. It's a bunch of targets. Does Trump risk hemorrhaging support in the United States by getting into, let's even say, half of a Yugoslavian campaign that Bill Clinton ran, or a third of the Libyan campaign that Barack Obama ran?
Yeah, completely fair concerns. And one of the things I would note is that the Ayatollah theoretically could fly off to Moscow. There are all these reports that they've been flying gold bars to Moscow and bringing in weapons back on the flights and stuff like that. If you are first of all, if you're the Iranian military, maybe some of their units are going out and oppressing the people. There are probably some Iranian military folks who are like, I don't want to shoot my fellow countrymen. I don't want to shoot people who are protesting because they can't afford food and their money has become devalued. And if the United States starts bombing, military targets that are not associated with hitting the civilians, if they start hitting like naval, units or something like that, I could see the Iranians saying, "What are you doing, America? Why are you shooting, my brother who's defending our country?" So you got your target selection matters a lot. I have no idea about how difficult this would be, but I do figure if you could do anything akin to a decapitation strike, if you could take out the Ayatollah, if you could take out the top commanders, then there'd be a question for the Iranian military: whose side do you want to be on, and do you want to get into a fight with the Americans, or do you want to say, you know what, new group of people in charge, we're going to try. It's a fresh new day. Let's leave all this bad blood behind us.
Well, we can pray for that. Jim Garrity, good luck getting into the school. Remember, it's illegal to break and enter even a robotics competition. Follow Jim on X at Jim Garrity. Read him in the Washington Post. Read The Morning Jolt. Noah Rothman, senior editor with National Review. Noah, I'm from northeastern Ohio, where tonight it's going to be minus 5 degrees in Ashtabula, minus 11 degrees in my hometown of Warren, and minus 12 degrees in Youngstown. Do you have any idea why my wife won't move to Ohio?
I can hazard a guess. It is so cold, Hugh, and it has been so cold for so long. There's this little quirk in my bathroom shower where we have a rain head shower head that just doesn't work under 20 degrees. I don't remember the last time that thing has worked. It's driving me quite batty, now that you mention
Well, I thought New Jersey was getting the short end of the stick as well, but if you marry a California girl, those are unacceptable numbers. Noah, let's get serious in a hurry because we got to talk a lot. Do you expect a war with Iran?
I expect strikes on Iran. I don't know what the scale of those strikes are going to be. I think the president set himself up to the degree that he has to follow through with his red line. It has been flagrantly violated. And the president himself has said that this was a terrible decision for Barack Obama not to follow up on his own self-set line. I think there has to be strikes. I hope they're not symbolic. They very well could be. There's a variety of scenarios that we could be seeing. I'm not sure if the president wants to see a strike so broad and so big that it could actually collapse the regime, although I think that's probably desirable. But it could be calibrated in a way so as to avoid triggering an Iranian response that looks like the response we could expect if it was an existential threat to the regime, which could take many forms, the most scary of which would be a real concerted effort to sink a U.S. warship. That would take a lot of drones, a lot of one-way attack drones, missiles, boats armed with suicide attackers. It would be a concentrated attack in order to achieve something real, not just a demonstrative display like we saw in the wake of the Operation Midnight Hammer, where they targeted the base in Qatar. It would be something very different. But that is my nightmare scenario, not just loosing all the missiles and seeing where they go, and hopefully they have some kind of an effect and a message, something really designed to demonstrate that the U.S. is vulnerable, and this is how.
You know, the British Navy, when they invaded successfully the Falklands to take them back from the Argentinians many, many years ago, Thatcher sent it, the Argentinians sunk a British ship to the great shock of the Imperial Royal Navy that a Nexus-set missile could do that. So there's no guarantee, and there are a lot of bases. I asked Admiral Mark Montgomery yesterday, retired Rear Admiral from the United States Navy. He thinks the greater threat are to our bases, anywhere with a GPS. They're not so good at the stuff that moves, that they're pretty good at finding the bases, Noah.
Yeah, and this would be, for the regime to take on that kind of an operation, it would be an all or nothing sort of situation. That's when the clerisy believes that the game is really up. I heard my colleague Jim on your last segment say that there's the possibility that the Iranian clerisy could flee to Moscow. I think that's pretty remote. Just based on their own mythology. It was the Shah that fled. It was the Shah that slaughtered people in the streets. And we're not like that. We don't do that, even though they obviously are doing precisely that. So there's something of an element to this regime from the founding that maintains that this is Iran, we are Iran, we die with Iran, or we live with Iran. So I don't expect them to flee. I expect them to fight. But
no, the older
they also
generation
don't want to face the wrath of their own people.
Yeah, the younger generation listens to Richard Dawkins. The older generation fought the Iran-Iraq War for 10 years and walked through minefields. So they're not going anywhere. My question is, in terms of what Trump said, what the president said on Truth Social, then on my show, then to Sean Hannity, then to CBS News, Tony DeCopel, then on Truth Social again. I think he said 8 times that a price will be paid if they harm the demonstrator. He has to do it. But it's just a question of, I don't think he has to do it until we're as safe as we can be, and I accept that as an excuse. We're still flying THAADs in. How long does he have until he is rightly subject to criticism for erasing a red line like Obama did?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's already too late for me. And I suspect that it was a material deficit. We talked about this at the time, that our assets were tied up in the campaign in
Correct.
Venezuela, and we did not have the assets in place to make good on this historic opportunity. I think that is a real missed opportunity that posterity will not look at kindly. But he doesn't have much longer to wait. I think the protests, we don't have a lot of great information coming out of Iran, but I think the protests have already relatively fizzled out. And we're starting to talk ourselves into the notion that the best case scenario would be a military dictatorship to replace the regime, ousting, I imagine, the IRGC and the Quds forces, the religious police. The religious character of the regime would be replaced with something much more like the regime that under Sisi or Mubarak in Egypt, something very military in nature and very undemocratic. I think we shouldn't be talking ourselves into that as though that's the best case option for us right now. We have the violence that we saw on the street was a result of an outpouring of, I would call it, democratic enthusiasm. I don't think I'm shy about saying that that was a liberal movement at its root, and it's something that can be cultivated.
I have Kareem Sajipur on in the last hour. And I'm going to ask him, because he knows Iran at least as well as anyone inside the Beltway without a classified access to information. What is the ceiling for Iran? I think it's really high. I think it is very much, it's a first world country. The Shah had it on the white revolution path, and it's just gone backwards for 47 years. I think it can reclaim growth pretty quickly. They've got everything there.
I think it can too. There's a lot of X factors there, including the repression of Iranian minorities over the course of the last 50 years. How would the Azeris feel, the Kurds, the Baluch, the Marsh Arabs? How would they feel about a military dictatorship? Would they simply roll over for it, or would they have to be suppressed and pacified? And
Yeah,
that's
Federation. Now, let me ask you about
worst
Tom
case
Homan
scenario.
this morning. After the break, I'll play my appearance on America Reports this morning, which was right after America's Newsroom, right after Homan got done speaking. And I began by saying that was a masterful class in communication. Did you watch him?
I didn't watch it. I read a transcript or elements of the transcript, and so
Well, the
I
key
can't. I
thing-
can't comment on it. I can't comment on the dramaturgy of it as a theater critic, but I can say that the substance of the remarks were powerful, impressive, and exactly what the moment called for. Again, I've said this a couple of times. I don't know if I said it on your show, but a tactical retreat, which is what they're engineering here, is not the abandonment of the campaign. It is the prosecution of the campaign on more auspicious terms and better circumstances. And that's, I think, what this administration, the better part of prudence compelled this administration to do that. And I'm very glad that they took that opportunity. That the temperature in this country is quite high right now. And even though it looks like a retreat, indeed the second in as many weeks, if you count the off-ramp that the president took in Greenland, but that is prudent leadership, commendable leadership, and a de-escalation of the conflict that this administration sought and waged, and secured many successes in the prosecution of it. But
Homan
moving
is
back
a third
and
generation
de-escalating is
cop.
important.
His dad was a cop. His grandfather was a cop. He's been in law enforcement for 40 years. He did not raise his voice. Cops know they do not want to be involved in officer shooting. Most importantly, he didn't raise his voice. He spoke calmly throughout. I wish everyone in America would learn you don't persuade anyone by shouting. Do you think that message is going to get across to anybody?
Well, it does get across to almost everybody who's not engaged in political combat on a daily basis. I mean, those of us who are involved in this business, we're the weird ones. We're the ones who think that, domestic politics is an existential fight for the very soul of the nation. Most of the country doesn't think that way, and so they wouldn't behave that way in a very high-strung and theatrical manner. But those of us who do politics as entertainment sometimes lapse into that, and that can find its way into the political cast. It's good to see that permanent bureaucrats like Tom Homan, very good at his job, just reject that form of theater as statecraft.
May it spread. Follow Noah at Noah C. Rothman. Read him in the National Review. Listen to him on the editors. I was up early today because Tom Homan decided to give his press conference before Minnesotans went to work. So it was in the wee hours of the morning to go get on with Fox with Bill Hemmer and Dana Perino. Here's what I had to say after Tom Homan wrapped up his press conference, cut number 1.
Go ahead and get some hot reaction right now from Hugh Hewitt. Hugh, you've been watching. Good morning. Welcome to our coverage. How did Homan do? Where do we go next on this?
Good morning, Bill. Good morning, Dana. That was a master class in communication. The border czar was calm throughout, demonstrating what 40 years in law enforcement will do, which is provide you a wealth of precision, a wealth of experience on which to draw. He answered a few questions, but mostly his messaging was, we are here to do a job. I have discussed that job with all of the local officials. As a reporter noted, the Attorney General has agreed to detainer notices from state prison. He is not retreating. He complimented President Trump for his remarkable consistency on the border messaging. And what I think was most effective in his messaging, he mentioned that for 4 years the border was open and that anyone who crossed it would get a plane ticket and lots of benefits if they would just work with people at the border, and that 2 million people chose not to do that, and he is most worried about those 2 million people because for some reason their incentive was not to interact with the Border Patrol and Customs and Immigration Enforcement when they crossed the border, when it was open. So he set the table for people to understand. So my hat is off to Tom Homan. You know, he's the third generation cop. He spent 30 years with the Border Patrol. He joined ICE in 2013. President Obama gave him a senior job, gave him a senior award. He stuck around for Trump 1. He's back at Trump 2. I think he's a profoundly competent public servant. But what I appreciated the most is he did not raise his voice. He stuck to facts, and he made it very clear that those who are engaged in the signal groups, the WhatsApp groups, justice is coming. That came at the end. It was a question that maybe people didn't stick around for, but justice is coming, which is what I think a lot of people, left, right, and center, who are not radical, who are not engaged in violence, wanted to hear that those who are provoking, those who are agitating, justice is coming for them, and immigration enforcement in the meantime is going to continue in Minneapolis.
I believe the other thing that he was able to do is to fulfill what President Trump asked, which is for a pivot. And Tom Homan was quiet for a couple of days, got the situation assessed, communicated with the local officials, and didn't come out too early and make promises he couldn't keep. He did talk about the increasing rhetoric against ICE agents. Let's listen to him here.
The hostile rhetoric and dangerous threats and hate must stop. And we all agreed to that. All everybody met here today, we got to stop the rhetoric. I begged for the last 2 months on TV for the rhetoric to stop. I said in March, if the rhetoric didn't stop, there's going to be bloodshed. And there has been. I wish I wasn't right. I don't want to see anybody die. Not officers, not members of the community, and not the targets of our operations.
And Hugh, I was disturbed last night on the 5. We played this compilation of Democrat politicians, including Pritzker, who was saying that, and then Krasner out of Philadelphia, really ratcheting up the agitators when it comes to being against ICE. And so I think Tom Homan is a very calming influence there in Minnesota. Maybe it'll spread throughout, but I feel like left-wing politicians are dug in.
They are, and I don't think it's going to stop on the fringes, though in Minneapolis and Minnesota, I think it will be dialed back because they paid the price. What I thought was so very, very winsome about Tom Homan this morning is his refusal to have an opinion on the latest Preddy video of the second man who was killed in Minnesota. And that's an example for everyone. We are an instant replay society. We learn to have opinions on the fly. When the NFL or the Major League Baseball pitching strikes is called, we all have opinions on whether or not they're good calls. This is not that. Tom Homan refusing to comment on a video is perhaps the best example for the left wing and the right wing who want to comment on everything they see unfolding in front of them. Absolutely, I want to go back to what I first said. He's a master communicator. And if everyone would simply adopt his tone, his style, and his realization that these are life and death situations, that we don't want any more violent deaths because they're just doing their job and there's a real job to be done. A lot of illegal alien criminals entered the country. They've got to be found. They've got to be deported. But that's the tone. I think Donald Trump has got exactly what he wanted from Director Homan going up.
All right, Hugh, looking forward on that last point, there are 12 states plus the District of Columbia considered a sanctuary jurisdiction. There are 4 counties in the same category. There are 18 cities, including New York, that are in the same category.
They've got to stop. Bill closed the second half by saying that's just got to end. I agree with it. I'm joined by Eliana Johnson on the Hugh Hewitt Show. She is the editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon, a contributor to Commentary Podcast. She is also a native of the Twin Cities. Eliana, I want to start with the Twin Cities. I haven't heard the Commentary Podcast. I was in the dentist chair for 2 days and not dancing around listening to you and the fellas and Christine over at Commentary. What do you think of Tom Homan's remarks this morning and of the situation in the Twin Cities now?
Well, Hugh, I just listened to your remarks on the Fox program, and I totally agree with you. I thought he gave an absolutely lucid presentation. And I will say, as a reporter, I love somebody who goes up to the microphone and says, I was given talking points, but I'm not going to use them. So that was fantastic. And the one thing I thought he did, I know you said you appreciated one of his remarks in particular, but something else caught my eye. You liked his remark about no comment on the video. I appreciated something else, which was his explanation very clearly that minimal cooperation from local law enforcement will allow ICE to draw down quickly, and why. And he explained that for ICE, picking up a criminal illegal immigrant from a jail requires much less manpower than doing an operation to pick up a criminal off the streets or in their home, which requires a big team plus a team to follow to deal with all of the rioters whose main goal has been not peaceful protests, but to interfere and prevent the administration of federal law enforcement. And I thought that was really important.
It was. And again, I heard that too. And I thought, point. Eliana, do you think Donald Trump has a unique way of communicating, but not many people, if anyone else, can do it that way? Because you have to be a celebrity. You have to have a bit of the developer in you. You've got to have 10 years of reality television training to communicate with that range. I think the Homan approach, calm, quiet, collected, ought to be passed around the cabinet table, and people ought to be told to study. It's Marco Rubio's way. It's the way of Doug Burgum. There are only a few people who want to hit ranges that are outside of their vocal expertise.
There are a number of good communicators, I think, that the president has on hand for this mission, which is a serious one in Minnesota. Tom Homan, whose background 40 years in law enforcement, his sober mien and deep knowledge both of the mission and of the law, I think was perfectly suited to Minnesota, as was Marco Rubio's yesterday in the Senate, which was a masterclass in diplomatic in diplomacy and of back and forth, and they had different styles. Rubio was funny and charming, and I wouldn't say Homan was either of those things, but they were both wonderful in their respective venues.
Here's a third approach from today's cabinet meeting. It's Vice President Vance, cut number 16 for Eliana Johnson.
I just want to thank everybody for being here. My cabinet has been amazing. I like this much better than going around for 3 hours. We'll pick on other ones. Pam, you're doing great. We're all doing great. JD, if you'd like to say something, you can. Would you like to really quickly? He is, after all, the Vice President of the United States.
It's okay, sir. I'm here for the free coffee. I just say it's an honor to serve with this group. And
so that understatement, Eliana, is also a good trick for people, don't you think?
Well, particularly when you're sitting next to or across from the president and he's in the room with you. I think Vance really showed his range and his utility on the campaign trail, where he came out of the gate and had a rough go of things. But he's really been fantastic doing battle with the media, particularly on these Sunday shows. And he really shines going back and forth with the mainstream press, and has showed he's a real asset to this administration, where when he does a Sunday show, the headlines that come out of it, particularly with Margaret Brennan on CBS News, are of the vice president pressing the administration's case and owning the respective hosts. And I think the president came to value that both on the campaign trail and in the administration.
I've called him the John Wick of the Sunday shows. I think he is the John Wick of the Sunday shows. Now let's go to Iran. War or no war, Eliana Johnson, what do you think?
You know, Hugh, it's funny. We talked about this a week ago. I was sort of the outlier on the commentary podcast saying that I thought the window for action was still open. And that's where I still am. I do believe the president will act. None of us know what's going to happen. I could be wrong. But with the assets in the region and Trump renewing his threats, he's laid out his conditions for a deal. They are abandon the nuclear program, limit ballistic missile capacity, which remains formidable for this regime, even though it was weakened by the 12-day war in June. Israel and the U.S. really did not touch ballistic missile capacity and stop the funding of terror proxies. It seems to me that those are conditions that the Iranian regime will not agree to. And so I think we're going to see action.
Has Adam Credo figured out what the war plan is yet? Because Adam usually has the scoops over at the Washington Free Beacon.
I wish, trust me, Hugh, we'd have that on the front page if we knew it.
He is a remarkable reporter. I don't know how long he's been at the Beacon, but he's
an OG.
As do a lot of your people.
He's a 12-year OG, and I would point your folks to his wonderful report yesterday morning that the PA president claimed to have suspended pay-for-slay programs. They were merely shifted into another organization and continued all the while. A confidential, non-public State Department report to Congress showed, once a terrorist, always a terrorist.
I also want to compliment the Free Beacon. I hate affirmative action. It's unconstitutional to use race to award and gender to award benefits or to inflict punishments. Absolutely unconstitutional. You guys stay on that. Is that like a beat at the Beacon?
Our superstar reporter, and we have several of them, but our reporter, Aaron Sibarium, is on that, as are a few others. And I would note that the Justice Department weighed in a case on UCLA that was brought by Do No Harm against UCLA Medical School. And the Justice Department weighed in on Do No Harm's behalf just yesterday. So we're seeing concrete action from this administration on this matter. And the source of it is impactful reporting.
Last year, a former member of the UCLA Board of Advisors told me that 2 years ago, do you know how many Jews were admitted to UCLA Medical School 2 years ago?
No.
One Jewish doctor at the UCLA Medical School class of 2 years ago. I cannot believe it. Eliana, good to see you as always. Follow Eliana on X at Eliana Y. Johnson. Read the Free Beacon. First things first, Donald Trump at the cabinet meeting today, cut number 11.
We are going to ask a couple of people to say a few words, and we're not going to go through the whole table because the last time we had a press conference, it lasted for 3 hours. And some people said he closed his eyes. Look, it got pretty boring. In all fairness, I love these people.
That's just Donald Trump. I don't want to be boring. I do want to tell you about how to save money with Consumer Cellular. Great sponsor of our program, consumercellular.com/Hugh. Or you call 1-800-411-4454. Get your phone bill out first. 1-800-411-4454. Remember my name, Hugh is your code, whether you call 1-800-411-4454 or you go online to consumercellular.com/Hugh. If you use my name, your second month, if you switch, will be free. And you should switch. You'll want to switch. You will save money, especially if you're 50 years and older. You will save money. If you're 50 years and older, you're going to have 2 lines, transfer 2 numbers. Very easy to do. Takes about 20 minutes to switch. 2 lines, you and your spouse, you and your best friend. 2 lines, switch over. $60 a month if you're both over 50. All right, so it'd be unlimited data. And the reason being, they know we just don't, those of us over 50, we just don't use as much data as the youngs. Therefore, they price it that way. And if you don't use much data at all, you get a 5 gig plan and a 10 gig plan. They got plans for every purse. They got plans for every wallet. But you got to call to find out. 1-800-411-4454. It's a one-touch button, too. You'll get a menu, touch, one button. And you'll be talking to a real live person here in the U.S. of A. Their customer service all located in the United States. Consumercellular.com/Hugh or 1-800-411-4454. Use my name, Hugh. And I'm in the Relief Factor studio. Time to take my Relief Factor. I'm feeling a lot better than yesterday. Had the root canal yesterday morning. Got through the show. And, the swelling, I had an ice pack and all that stuff. Swelling wasn't bad. I credit Relief Factor at least with a little bit of that. If you're watching on the Salem News Channel, I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, are right in my hand. I do this every day. And I do it with a little bit of Arrowhead water now that I've moved to the afternoons. I used to have lukewarm coffee, but now I have Arrowhead water. And it goes down whether it's lukewarm coffee, Trader Joe's water, or Arrowhead water, depending on which Relief Factor studio I am in. Relief Factor goes down easily. Now, here's what the secret of it is. It helps your body's anti-inflammatory system. So my dentist goes in there yesterday and takes out a crown and takes out a root. I said, I thought I actually didn't know I had any roots left after all the years of dentistry I've gone through. That doesn't feel particularly pleasant, but it's the swelling that really is a problem. No swelling. I'm fine today. And I put that down to Relief Factor. That's what it works on, the anti-inflammatory system of your body. So whether it's your teeth, I don't know how well it works there, but it worked for me. I know it does help people with lower back problems, tennis elbow. People come to me and tell me it works. But you got to call to get the starter pack at $19.95, less than $1 a day. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF. Or go find the starter pack at their website, relieffactor.com. Watching on the Salem News Channel. If you're watching, you're listening to the Salem Radio Network or one of our great affiliates. If you're in your car or listening on the radio, welcome to hour 2 of today's program. I'm glad to kick it off with former United States Senator Jim Talent. He represented the state of Missouri. He's now a senior fellow at the Reagan Institute for the Study of Peace through Strength. Senator Talent, we were talking off air about Admiral Montgomery yesterday, who was fabulous. But you've been in the defense business as long as he has. Do you think we are on the cusp of a very violent war?
Well, I wouldn't call it. I mean, all war is violent. I think we're on the cusp of a campaign that will be a much more sustained campaign than we had to do to take out their nuclear arsenal. I heard Mark say 10 to 12 days, which to me seems about right, because there's two objectives here. The first is to enforce our red line and thereby enhance our credibility in the Middle East and around the world. The president's going to do that beyond a shadow of a doubt. The second is to further degrade Iran's ability to aggress against its neighbors and destabilize the region, which is against our national interest. Again, if you read the national security strategy. So the logical thing to take out is their missile capabilities and the anti-air systems that protect them to the extent those are still left. And in order to do that job well, it takes a lot of sorties. You're not going to do that in a day. So one interesting question, which Mark talked about, is whether the Israelis are going to join in. I would love to be a fly on the wall when Trump is talking with Netanyahu about that.
What do you think the preference of the president is? I think he would prefer that they not, but I don't think he's going to hold them back if one missile is shot at them.
Right. With regard to the Israelis,
yeah,
it's a complicated question. I mean, because Israel has moved from a containment policy in the region to a preemption policy in the region. And Netanyahu has been very, very decisive about doing that. And I think he's got the Israeli people behind him. So the Israelis can send a message here, too. I mean, in the past, they've tried to do hands off on this sort of thing because they felt more vulnerable in the region. If he joins in, I think it's a good way of sending the message, look, we're the hegemon of the region, and we're going to act like it when our security's at stake. So I think they ought to do it. I think Admiral Montgomery was right. Go ahead and join in.
I was with a client back in my law practice days in Nevada, big swinger, Jewish man, big supporter of Israel, when Israel did not respond to Saddam's Scuds. And he couldn't believe it. I was in his office. He could not believe that they were not responding. But of course, Secretary Baker and George H.W. Bush asked them not to respond. I don't think Donald Trump's in the business of asking people not to respond if they want to.
And I think President Trump adjusts better to changes in strategic positioning. In other words, in the past, Israel has acted sometimes like they can't be a normal. Do what a normal nation would do in a normal situation, okay? Which is to take advantage of this to attack and degrade their chief aggressor. I think the Israelis are done with that, and I think Trump is fine with it. Trump is not burdened by 30 or 40 years of assumptions about the Middle East. I mean, he's rethinking the region. He's rethought it. And I just think, look, anybody else in Israel's position with Israel's power would join us in this attack. And so I'd like to see him do it. Now, again, there are a whole lot of factors working that you and I don't know about, so maybe they won't. But we're certainly going to use their intel, particularly if we go after command and control with the IRGC. They're going to tell us where everybody is.
Would you expect any of the Gulf Coordinating Council countries to join in?
No, except defensively when the Iranians respond. And I would reassure people, we're very good at this kind of mission. When we have time to build up, to plan, and when the environment is basically non-competitive, I mean, this is not the South China Sea, right? Where there are thousands and thousands and thousands of anti-ship cruise and ballistic missiles along the coast of China. This is a basically uncompetitive environment. We're good at this. And so I'm not saying that we can't take any casualties, but I feel pretty confident in our force protection package.
Jim, you and I are the same age here. I think you can remember the build-up to the 1991 war, which kicked off, I think, on March 1 or thereabouts, 1991. And the projections of the dead on our team, on our side, was going to be in the 5 digits. And people were horrified at that, but it was going to be 5 digits. Men lost their lives, but it was in the hundreds. It might not even been over 100. I can't remember. In the Panama Canal invasion in 1991, we lost 23. Some soldiers were killed on Heartbreak Ridge in Grenada. And then when the 2003 invasion happened, we thought chemical weapons and everything was going to rain down on our troops, and it didn't happen. Do you think that the false premise of 4 wars with relatively low casualties has Americans complacent about the risk our troops face right now?
Well, we had a couple wars after that, where unfortunately we took a lot of casualties, or relatively speaking, compared to those other engagements, we took a lot of casualties. So no, I think people are worried. I think Donald Trump is uniquely reluctant to use American military power in a sustained combat type situation. Now, I don't know that we'd call 10, 12, 14 days, all that sustained. So this is a president, I think, who uniquely, and sometimes I worry about it. Sometimes I think maybe he's too reluctant. So we're not going to go in until we're ready, and until we have in place what we need to protect our people as much as they can be protected. That's why I say I have a fair amount of confidence. I mean, you never know with war, and he's got to pull the trigger. It's just a question now of when. And I've been saying this on the show and on the pod now for the better part of a month, so I should be careful. But I've got to believe it's going to be soon.
The podcast that Senator Talon is referring to is Dwayne's World, on which he appears every week when Dwayne gets together with the senator, and it's great national security stuff. What do you expect follows a sustained campaign, even if it's 2 weeks? More mullahs, more IRGC, or perhaps a different military general in the way that Sisi took power back from the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt?
Well, I heard one of, I think it was Dan Senor's interviewees. He has so many good ones. I can't remember exactly which one, but he said the next leader of Iran is not going to be wearing a turban. He's going to be wearing a military cap. And I would really expect that when it happens. I don't think we should necessarily expect that to happen as a result of this campaign, though, because I don't think the purpose of it is to achieve regime collapse. What I would expect we'll do after that is really go after their oil shipments, their shadow oil fleet. I think that's a better alternative than Carg Island, which you've talked about, because we don't want to cripple the nation. We want to cripple the regime, and you can do that by going after their oil shipments. So, assuming we have the assets to do it, we can do to them what we're doing to Venezuela now, and choke off revenue further from the regime.
Do you think that they are in touch with reality enough to know what happens were they to inflict serious casualties on American troops? And I mean, if they got a hit on a destroyer, I think Donald Trump would go through the roof.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't think so, I think this is the collapse. And they're going to be this is kind of like Hitler in the bunker, is what I think. I mean, this is the collapse of all their ideological and eschatological pretensions. I think they'll be desperate to do anything to prevent it. And the question is, which the Israelis may know, I don't know, is are there regime factions that are drawing back from that kind of a scorched earth policy who will act if necessary? I think they've been waiting for the supreme leader to die, which makes sense. I mean, that's the time for a transition to something new. So, but are there forces that are prepared to say at some point, no, you know what, we're going to hurry that along. We'll bring a pillow to his bedside in the bunker, and we'll get change before that. And I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows. If anybody knew, it would be the Israelis.
I'm watching his son. His son has amassed a fortune of many, many hundreds of millions of dollars outside of the country. And that's not the action of a confident next in line supreme leader, is it?
No. And I've got to believe that there are people close to him who aren't quite as willing to die as he may be. I mean, there's a limit to how much the top leader is one thing, or the people immediately around him. But I've never thought that when you broaden it out, the RGC generals and the rest of it, that they're as willing, to meet their maker as the supreme leader is. So if it happens soon, if regime collapse happens soon, that'll be what'll cause it. There'll be a faction
we will look
that'll
for
move
that.
against him.
And we will look for Senator Talent to be back next week. He's also a frequent guest on Dwayne's World. I don't know how often Dwayne is doing that. He's thinking about rekindling the after show. Be careful, Jim. He'll trap you into that on a daily basis. Don't go anywhere, America. Thank you, Senator Talent. Follow him on X at Jim Talent. Noah Rothman, senior editor with National Review. Noah, I'm from northeastern Ohio, where tonight it's going to be minus 5 degrees in Ashtabula, minus 11 degrees in my hometown of Warren, and minus 12 degrees in Youngstown. Do you have any idea why my wife won't move to Ohio?
I can hazard a guess. It is so cold, Hugh, and it has been so cold for so long. There's this little quirk in my bathroom shower where we have a rain head shower head that just doesn't work under 20 degrees. I don't remember the last time that thing has worked. It's driving me quite batty. Now that you mention
Well, I thought New Jersey was getting the short end of the stick as well, but if you marry a California girl, those are unacceptable numbers. Noah, let's get serious in a hurry because we got to talk a lot. Do you expect a war with Iran?
I expect strikes on Iran. I don't know what the scale of those strikes are going to be. I think the president set himself up to the degree that he has to follow through with his red line. It has been flagrantly violated. And the president himself has said that this was a terrible decision for Barack Obama not to follow up on his own self-set line. I think there has to be strikes. I hope they're not symbolic. They very well could be. There's a variety of scenarios that we could be seeing. I'm not sure if the president wants to see a strike so broad and so big that it could actually collapse the regime, although I think that's probably desirable. But it could be calibrated in a way so as to avoid triggering an Iranian response that looks like the response we could expect if it was an existential threat to the regime, which could take many forms, the most scary of which would be a real concerted effort to sink a U.S. warship. That would take a lot of drones, a lot of one-way attack drones, missiles, boats armed with suicide attackers. It would be a concentrated attack in order to achieve something real, not just a demonstrative display like we saw in the wake of the Operation Midnight Hammer, where they targeted the base in Qatar. It would be something very different. But that is my nightmare scenario, not just loosing all the missiles and seeing where they go, and hopefully they have some kind of an effect and a message, something really designed to demonstrate that the U.S. is vulnerable, and this is how.
You know, the British Navy, when they invaded successfully the Falklands to take them back from the Argentinians many, many years ago, Thatcher Senate, the Argentinians sunk a British ship to the great shock of the Imperial Royal Navy that a Nexus-7 missile could do that. So there's no guarantee, and there are a lot of bases. I asked Admiral Mark Montgomery yesterday, retired Rear Admiral from the United States Navy. He thinks the greater threat are to our bases, anywhere with a GPS. They're not so good at the stuff that moves that they're pretty good at finding the bases, Noah.
Yeah, and this would be, for the regime to take on that kind of an operation, it would be an all or nothing sort of situation. That's when the clerisy believes that the game is really up. I heard my colleague Jim on your last segment say that there's the possibility that the Iranian clerisy could flee to Moscow. I think that's pretty remote. just based on their own mythology. It was the Shah that fled. It was the Shah that slaughtered people in the streets. And we're not like that. We don't do that, even though they obviously are doing precisely that. So there's something of an element to this regime from the founding that maintains that this is Iran, we are Iran, we die with Iran, or we live with Iran. So I don't expect them to flee. I expect them to fight. But
no, the older
they also
generation
don't want to face the wrath of their own people.
Yeah, the younger generation listens to Richard Dawkins. The older generation fought the Iran-Iraq War for 10 years and walked through minefields. So they're not going anywhere. My question is, in terms of what Trump said, what the president said on Truth Social, then on my show, then to Sean Hannity, then to CBS News, Tony DeCopel, then on Truth Social again. I think he said 8 times that a price will be paid if they harm the demonstrator. He has to do it. But it's just a question of, I don't think he has to do it until we're as safe as we can be, and I accept that as an excuse. We're still flying THAADs in. How long does he have until he is rightly subject to criticism for erasing a red line like Obama did?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's already too late for me, and I suspect that it was a material deficit. We talked about this at the time, that our assets were tied up in the campaign in Venezuela, and we did not have the assets in place to make good on this historic opportunity. I think that is a real missed opportunity that posterity will not look at kindly. But he doesn't have much longer to wait. I think the protests, we don't have a lot of great information coming out of Iran, but I think the protests have already relatively fizzled out. And we're starting to talk ourselves into the notion that the best case scenario would be a military dictatorship to replace the regime, ousting, I imagine, the IRGC and the Quds forces, the religious police. The religious character of the regime would be replaced with something much more like the regime that under Sisi or Mubarak in Egypt, something very military in nature and very undemocratic. I think we shouldn't be talking ourselves into that as though that's the best case option for us right now. We have the violence that we saw on the street was a result of an outpouring of, I would call it democratic enthusiasm. I don't think I'm shy about saying that was a liberal movement at its root, and it's something that can be cultivated.
I have Kareem Sajipur on in the last hour. And I'm going to ask him, because he knows Iran at least as well as anyone inside the Beltway without a classified access to information. What is the ceiling for Iran? I think it's really high. I think it is very much, it's a first world country. The Shah had it on the white revolution path, and it's just gone backwards for 47 years. I think it can reclaim growth pretty quickly. They've got everything there.
I think it can too. There's a lot of X factors there, including the repression of Iranian minorities over the course of the last 50 years. How would the Azeris feel, the Kurds, the Baluch, the Marsh Arabs? How would they feel about a military dictatorship? Would they simply roll over for it, or would they have to be suppressed and pacified? That's the problem.
Now, let me ask you about
worst
Tom
case
Homan
scenario.
this morning. After the break, I'll play my appearance on America Reports this morning, which was right after America's Newsroom, right after Homan got done speaking. And I began by saying that was a masterful class in communication. Did you watch him?
I didn't watch it. I read a transcript or elements of the transcript, and so
Well,
I can't comment on it. I can't comment on the dramaturgy of it as a theater critic, but I can say that the substance of the remarks were powerful, impressive, and exactly what the moment called for. Again, I've said this a couple of times. I don't know if I said it on your show, but a tactical retreat, which is what they're engineering here, is not the abandonment of the campaign. It is the prosecution of the campaign on more auspicious terms and better circumstances. And that's, I think, what this administration, the better part of prudence compelled this administration to do that. And I'm very glad that they took that opportunity. That the temperature in this country is quite high right now. And even though it looks like a retreat, indeed the second in as many weeks, if you count the off-ramp that the president took in Greenland, but that is prudent leadership, commendable leadership, and a de-escalation of the conflict that this administration sought and waged, and secured many successes in the prosecution of it. But
Homan
moving
is
back
a
and
third-generation
de-escalating is
cop.
important.
His dad was a cop. His grandfather was a cop. He's been in law enforcement for 40 years. He did not raise his voice. Cops know they do not want to be involved in officer shooting. Most importantly, he didn't raise his voice. He spoke calmly throughout. I wish everyone in America would learn you don't persuade anyone by shouting. Do you think that message is going to get across to anybody?
Well, it does get across to almost everybody who's not engaged in political combat on a daily basis. I mean, those of us who are involved in this business, we're the weird ones. We're the ones who think that, you know, domestic politics is an existential fight for the very soul of the nation. Most of the country doesn't think that way, and so they wouldn't behave that way in a very high-strung and theatrical manner. But those of us who do politics as entertainment sometimes lapse into that, and that can find its way into the political cast. It's good to see that permanent bureaucrats like Tom Homan, very good at his job, just reject that form of theater as statecraft.
May it spread. Follow Noah at Noah C. Rothman. Read him in the National Review. Listen to him on the Editor. I was up early today because Tom Homan decided to give his press conference before Minnesotans went to work. So it was in the wee hours of the morning to go get on with Fox with Bill Hemmer and Dana Perino. Here's what I had to say after Tom Homan wrapped up his press conference, cut number 1.
Go ahead and get some hot reaction right now from Hugh Hewitt. Hugh, you've been watching. Good morning. Welcome to our coverage. How did Homan do? Where do we go next on this?
Good morning, Bill. Good morning, Dana. That was a master class in communication. The border czar was calm throughout, demonstrating what 40 years in law enforcement will do, which is provide you a wealth of precision, a wealth of experience on which to draw. He answered a few questions, but mostly his messaging was, we are here to do a job. I have discussed that job with all of the local officials. As a reporter noted, the Attorney General has agreed to detainer notices from state prison. He is not retreating. He complimented President Trump for his remarkable consistency on the border messaging. And what I think was most effective in his messaging, he mentioned that for 4 years the border was open and that anyone who crossed it would get a plane ticket and lots of benefits if they would just work with people at the border, and that 2 million people chose not to do that, and he is most worried about those 2 million people because for some reason their incentive was not to interact with the Border Patrol and Customs and Immigration Enforcement when they crossed the border, when it was open. So he set the table for people to understand. So my hat is off to Tom Homan. You know, he's the third-generation cop. He spent 30 years with the Border Patrol. He joined ICE in 2013. President Obama gave him a senior job, gave him a senior award. He stuck around for Trump 1. He's back at Trump 2. I think he's a profoundly competent public servant. But what I appreciated the most is he did not raise his voice. He stuck to facts, and he made it very clear that those who are engaged in the signal groups, the WhatsApp groups, justice is coming. That came at the end. It was a question that maybe people didn't stick around for, but justice is coming, which is what I think a lot of people, left, right, and center, who are not radical, who are not engaged in violence, wanted to hear that those who are provoking, those who are agitating, justice is coming for them, and immigration enforcement in the meantime is going to continue in Minneapolis.
I believe the other thing that he was able to do is to fulfill what President Trump asked, which is for a pivot. And Tom Homan was quiet for a couple of days, got the situation assessed, communicated with the local officials, and didn't come out too early and make promises he couldn't keep. He did talk about the increasing rhetoric against ICE agents. Let's listen to him here.
The hostile rhetoric and dangerous threats and hate must stop. And we all agreed to that. All everybody met here to tell you, we got to stop the rhetoric. I begged for the last 2 months on TV for the rhetoric to stop. I said in March, if the rhetoric didn't stop, there's going to be bloodshed. And there has been. I wish I wasn't right. I don't want to see anybody die. Not officers, not members of the community, and not the targets of our operations.
And Hugh, I was disturbed last night on the 5. We played this compilation of Democrat politicians, including Pritzker, who was saying that, and then Krasner out of Philadelphia, really ratcheting up the agitators when it comes to being against ICE. And so I think Tom Homan is a very calming influence there in Minnesota. Maybe it'll spread throughout, but I feel like left-wing politicians are dug in.
They are, and I don't think it's going to stop on the fringes, though in Minneapolis and Minnesota, I think it will be dialed back because they paid the price. What I thought was so very, very winsome about Tom Homan this morning is his refusal to have an opinion on the latest Preddy video of the second man who was killed in Minnesota. And that's an example for everyone. We are an instant replay society. We learn to have opinions on the fly. When the NFL or the Major League Baseball pitching strikes calls, we all have opinions on whether or not they're good calls. This is not that. Tom Homan refusing to comment on a video is perhaps the best example for the left wing and the right wing who want to comment on everything they see unfolding in front of them. Absolutely, I want to go back to what I first said. He's a master communicator. And if everyone would simply adopt his tone, his style, and his realization that these are life and death situations, that we don't want any more violent deaths because they're just doing their job and there is a real job to be done. A lot of illegal alien criminals entered the country. They've got to be found. They've got to be deported. But that's the tone. I think Donald Trump has got exactly what he wanted from Director Homan going up.
All right, Hugh, looking forward on that last point, there are 12 states plus the District of Columbia considered a sanctuary jurisdiction. There are 4 counties in the same category. There are 18 cities, including New York, that are in the same category.
They've got to stop. Bill closed the second half by saying that's just got to end. I agree with him. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back with Eliana Johnson of the Washington Free Beacon. Lucas Tomlinson is one of the best war correspondents I know. He goes abroad wherever Fox News send him. Seen him a lot in Israel. Recently, though, I was on the set and he beamed in from Greenland. And I thought to myself, I've never had a guest from Greenland before. He's back. Lucas, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. When were you in Greenland and what did you find out when you were there?
Well, Hugh, thanks for having me. I just got back last night. I spent a week on the ground in Greenland when things were getting a little serious about people thinking that President Trump might use military means to take Greenland. Of course, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, President Trump walked that back, said he has no intention of using force. But the Danish government, who controls Greenland, they were a little nervous about it. You know, they spend about $600 million a year on Greenland, a territory that they have possessed that's been in the Danish realm since the 18th century. But what's notable, Hugh, Denmark has a population of just 6 million people. That's about twice the population of Brooklyn. To control an area of Greenland that is 3 times the size of Texas, yet a population that could fit into the seats of any NFL stadium, just 57,000 people. It's very strategic. You've been hearing President Trump, many others talk about the importance of the Arctic. The president wants to deploy the Golden Dome there. As you know, right now, U.S. missile defense, it's pretty limited. Just 44 interceptors in Fort Greely, Alaska, and just 4 interceptor missiles at Vandenberg Space Force Base in Santa Barbara, California, maybe not far from where you are right now. That's just to intercept a rogue ballistic missile from Iran or North Korea. There's no system in place to be able to handle a large-scale nuclear missile strike from Russia or China. Also, what missile defense experts tell me with Golden Dome is other targets would be in play. Hypersonic missiles, drones, cruise missiles. That is why President Trump wants to deploy the Golden Dome there. Of course, when you're at the top of the Earth, above the Arctic Circle, as 2/3 of Greenland is, it's a much shorter distance from Russia and China to any targets in the United States. So that's why President Trump thinks Greenland is so important and why he wants to expand the U.S. military presence there. Today, there's less than 200 troops at one single U.S. Space Force base in Patuxent. That was about 930 miles north of the capital of Nuuk, where I was. That's the same distance of from L.A. to Seattle here.
Now, Lucas, you were in Greenland for a week. I assume you got to talk to a lot of the native Greenlanders. More than 90% of Greenlanders are Inuit. What do they think about this? I'm sure you probably talked to all 57,000 in a week. What do they think about this?
A lot of the Inuits, the natives, even many of the Danes I spoke to, Hugh, they just want to be left alone. Now, a majority of Greenlanders, as they refer to themselves, they want to be left alone. They do want to be independent, though. They are not wild about, the Danes who they live under. The Danes, it's a welfare state. They spend about $600 million U.S. a year for Greenland. They take care of education, police, hospitals. It's about 20% of their GDP comes from Denmark. But many of the people I spoke to, not only they want to be independent, they really want to be left alone. They were not used to the media attention, as you can imagine. They're really it's a territory of hunters and gatherers. I mean, they hunt polar bears, seals, muskox. You might have to Google that one. It's a beautiful
I have
animal.
no idea what that is.
It's a giant ox, a big hairy beast in essence. And I actually enjoyed some reindeer meat, muskox. I ate raw seal liver at a market. If you're wondering, it tastes a lot like
No
beef,
wonder
I
you're a
thought.
foreign correspondent, Lucas. By the way, do they have a Costco?
No Costco in Greenland.
How
Although
about
I
a
thought
Trader
that was good.
Joe's?
No Trader Joe's.
I'm
A
not
lot
going
of
to Greenland.
local little grocery stores. The whale, I had a little bit of whale. The narwhal, a popular delicacy up there too, Hugh.
You don't want to be around when a narwhal comes through the ice. Tell me, Lucas, at least that's what I read in Endurance, the book about Shackleton. Yeah, tell me about how you were received. You're big time. I don't know if they get cable. I don't know if they watch Fox News. They've seen you in Israel when the bombs are coming down. Did they know who you are? Do they watch Fox News?
Some do, but it was notable that when the Greenland's prime minister held a press conference, he was almost doing the Joe Biden routine. He was going down a prepared list. I noticed CNN got the first question, and then he was going on and on down his list. I'm like, wait a minute, I traveled all the way here from Washington. I'm getting a question at this press conference. I moved my seat, and he looked up at one point and called to me, which was very nice. And I did
saw
ask
that.
him if he would welcome. Yeah,
It was a
asked him if he
polite
would welcome
question.
a great.
Yeah.
My question was, would you welcome a greater U.S. military presence in Greenland? Would you welcome the Golden Dome? As you can imagine, very diplomatic answer. He said it's discussions he'd love to have. He didn't rule it out. It's notable, a 1951 treaty between then President Truman and Denmark says, the U.S. military can have a presence. There's no limit on that. At the height of the Cold War, Hugh, there were 10,000 U.S. troops stationed in Greenland. And I don't know if you ever heard of Project Ice Worm, but it was a plan to bury thousands of nuclear missiles under the ice in Greenland. It was never completed, but it was worked on for years.
That's Dr. Strangelove stuff. Tell me, is the military base that housed 10,000 people still got the barracks? Do they still have the infrastructure, or are all the pipes frozen and burst?
Pipes frozen and burst. Those 10,000 troops at the height of the Cold War were spread out over 17 bases. Today, Hugh, there's just one. It's that Patuxent base, Space Force base in the far north, the high north of Greenland. With
How
those polar
many
bears.
how many towns of size do they have, Lucas? And I consider a town to be 5,000 to 10,000 people.
Just a handful. Nuuk was about 30,000 residents, so about half the territory lives in the capital. They refer to settlements as anything, 850 or less. They have dozens of those, but they do not have many big cities, you can imagine. In fact, some of the settlements to the north, they're only supplied, a few times a year. And you can imagine anything even coming into the capital has to come aboard ship. Very little comes from the air, of course, with cargo.
Listen a minute,
Mostly
Lucas.
giant-
Have you packed your bags for Israel?
I have, I told my boss, my bureau chief, that I'm ready to deploy to the Middle East. He goes, why don't you get back from Greenland first, and then we'll talk.
But would it just be Israel, or would you possibly go to UAE, Bahrain, Qatar? Do you have any idea where you'd be?
I would prefer, Israel would be great, of course. I would prefer into the Middle East, because if we do see action in Iran and the government were to break down, it might be a good time to get into the country.
I'm glad you're a young man. Might be a good time to be careful, Lucas Tomlinson. You're a friend, and you're very kind to come on and give us the first-person report from Greenland. Lucas Tomlinson, you can find him on X. I think it's Lucas Fox News on X. As I've said throughout the show today, Kareem Sajapur is coming up after the break in hour number 3 of today's Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem News Channel, on the Salem Radio Network throughout. You do not want to miss it. Stay in your car in your garage if you have to. Just open the door. Don't leave your car on. Or go inside and go find the Salem News Channel and turn it on. It is that good. He is that smart. You don't want to miss him. Something else you don't want to miss, pharmawindfall.com. pharmawindfall.com. That's run by my friends at Conservatives for Lower Healthcare Costs. They know that Big Pharma is trying to get in the door to stop the president's campaign to bring down the cost of pharmaceuticals. And we know that the American people are with the president. Pollster John McLaughlin, a longtime Trump pollster, has discovered 73% of voters blame Big Pharma for high prescription drug prices. 85% believe pharma-backed government intervention increases the cost of healthcare. They're right. 80% believe big pharma is behind proposals to increase government intervention. You don't want big pharma coming in again. You want big pharma out of the picture. The best way to do that is to join conservatives for lower healthcare costs. You can do that at pharmawindfall.com. I always remind people, we got Obamacare because of big pharma. We never want their lobbyists, who are legion and are good and are well paid. We never want their lobbyists to write another line of law. And that will be something you can help accomplish when you go to pharmawindfall.com. This is not Pharma Windfall. This is Relief Factor. I'm in the Relief Factor studio. I told you about it in hour one, and I took it in hour one, but I only take it once a day. I told you yesterday I had a root canal, and it was kind of nasty. I had swelling. It hurts still, but the swelling's gone, and I credit it to Relief Factor. I didn't even take Tylenol last night. I just needed the swelling to go down because I might have sounded a little bit slurred yesterday, and it's gone. One of the things that Relief Factor does is help your body's anti-inflammatory system, whether you're getting aches and pains from root canals or from exercise. I don't recommend root canals. Look, I was blessed with good parents and good genes, except when it comes to teeth. I told the doctor I was unaware that I had any roots left a canal, but in fact I did, so it took a while to get them out. But now it's just mildly discomfortable, and it did not swell up because Relief Factor works with your body's anti-inflammatory system, because most pain, most discomfort comes from inflammation. Give it a try, whether it's your lower back, your knees, your ankle, your shoulder, or where they took the tooth out, right? Not many of you have probably been. By the way, Dr. Takai was amazing. I have nothing to say, but he was just amazing. I want you to understand that. These doctors these days, it's not like the old days. First of all, you don't feel a thing when you're going through it. And when you wake, I wasn't under any general anesthetic, but when you leave, you can't talk. But other than that, I'm fine. Part of that is Relief Factor. So do give them a call. 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF, or head over there to their website and find the starter pack, $19.95, less than $1 a day for 3 weeks. ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com. Coming up, Kareem Sajapur of the Carnegie Endowment, the go-to guy on Iran. He's one of the about dozen people who actually know what they talk about, and I've had them all on, and I've kept Kareem for last because I think he knows at least as much as everybody else. So do not miss a minute of the coming hour with Kareem Sajapur on the Hugh Hewitt Show. As promised, I'm joined by Kareem Sajapur of the Carnegie Endowment. Kareem is one of the Beltway's genuine experts on the Islamic Republic of Iran, and he has been tutoring me for at least a decade. A mutual friend introduced us over dinner when I moved back to Washington in 2016. Had the occasion since then to meet with him a couple of times and dig deep into the Islamic Republic. And boy, you're in demand right now, Kareem. First of all, it's good to see you. Thank you for doing this. I know how busy you must be right now. Is the phone just ringing constantly off the hook?
It is indeed a very busy time, and I appreciate you inviting me back, Hugh.
Well, welcome back. Can we start by alerting the audience? Tell them your background. You went to the University of Michigan. We're going to overlook that here at Ohio State headquarters. But tell them your background and how you came to specialize in all things Iran.
Sure. So I was born in the United States, but my parents were originally from Iran. They emigrated to the United States. Most Iranian families in the United States came here 1979 or shortly thereafter when the 1979 revolution happened. But my parents had emigrated to the United States a decade prior to that. And so my father was a neurologist. We grew up mostly in Michigan. I went to University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I played soccer. The first person I met in freshman orientation was Tom Brady, a friendship which in hindsight I should have cultivated. And I grew up speaking Persian in our kitchen. I call it kitchen Persian. I wasn't formally schooled in it, but I grew up with English and Persian. And then I spent several years living abroad in college and even in high school. I spent a year living in Mexico. I lived in college in Italy. I wasn't really interested in the Middle East until I felt that things started to change in Iran politically. It looked like there was a political opening in the late 1990s. And so I started to, after undergrad, I went to graduate school at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I focused on the Middle East, and the first week of my grad school, 9/11 happened. And so that was when it was obviously very clear to me that I wanted to dedicate my career to this topic. And Hewitt, had you asked me in 2001 whether the Iranian regime would look the way it does today, I would have said no. It looked like Iran, even back then, was a country which was on the cusp of change. And so I was based in Tehran with an organization called the International Crisis Group. I was based there for several years until I was nearly imprisoned. I was one of the first of the dual nationals that they warned. I came back to the United States and I heeded that warning. I didn't go back to Iran, but many of my friends, perhaps more than a dozen, tried to go back to Iran, and they spent time in prison. And so for the last 2 decades now, I've been focused on Iran at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I'm a contributing writer at The Atlantic, and I teach at Georgetown University.
So, Kareem, I've told my audience many times, I watched the Iranian Revolution unfold on a couch in the Western White House with exiled Richard Nixon and Ray Price. We were the writers. The former president was doing the book, The Real War. And we'd watch every afternoon because the news would come on 3 hours earlier, and we saw the revolution unfold in real time. Where were you when the revolution unfolded?
So I was a young boy. I was born late 1976, so I was just about 2 years old when the revolution was happening in the state of Michigan. And, it obviously impacted our lives in different ways. So much of our extended family had to flee Iran. All of them had been in Iran, and our home in Michigan was kind of the safe harbor for many of them. So they fled Iran and they would come to stay with us in Michigan for a period until they were able to kind of resettle elsewhere. And I think in my parents' head, they probably thought maybe one day they would go back to Iran. But then when the revolution happened, we stayed in the United States. And my father was someone who, he was a neurologist, but he was someone who, he loved the United States, deeply patriotic American, but he also loved his heritage and his culture. And that duality was very much part of our childhood, that he used to always tell us, you guys live in the best country in the world, in the United States. But he was so proud of his heritage and Persian poetry and culture, which is so rich because it's got 2,500 plus years of history.
I've only had one other diaspora member on, Ben Talablu from FDD. I neglected to ask him, how varied is the Iranian diaspora? Does the regime have any supporters within it? And has it become increasingly militant about making a change in Iran?
The regime has virtually no support among certainly the diaspora in the United States. When polling is done, I think you probably see less than 1% support, because if you're a supporter of the regime, you live in Iran, you don't want to be in the United States. And I think for many years there's been not really a diversity of opinion when it comes to people's desired endgame in Iran among the diaspora Iranians. Even outside the United States, I would say vast majority of Iranians want to see some form of secular democracy. I think the debates have been about the means to get there, and whether, for example, economic sanctions is a viable or useful tool to try to reach that end of secular democracy, whether military action is a means that people would accept to get to that end game. And obviously the last month, the events in Iran, I think, have really altered that debate. Whereas 1 month ago, 2 months ago, probably those who supported some type of U.S. military action inside Iran were in the minority. I would argue now, and I haven't seen polling, so I'm not, this isn't scientific, but just anecdotal. My guess is that the majority of those who are in the diaspora would like to see President Trump make good on his word. President Trump threatened on 8 occasions that if Iran killed protesters, the United States was ready to protect them and take action. And obviously the Iranian regime drove a giant truck through President Trump's red line. They killed as many as 30,000 protesters. And so I think both within Iran, among the protesters, and in the diaspora, I would say there's probably a majority consensus, a majority support for some type of U.S. action.
Kareem, were you shocked by the level of barbarity that the regime employed in the last 3 weeks? I was one of those 8 occasions where the president said, help is on the way, keep marching, take over. He was very adamant that we were going to help, so I think we are going to help. But were you shocked by the level to which violence they descended? It's just Babi Yar, 1941, massacre of 33,000 Jews in Ukraine by the advancing Nazis. There hasn't been anything like this since that.
Unfortunately, Hugh, I wasn't terribly shocked by the brutality of the regime because at the end of the day, this is a regime which has no friends in the world. They have no great plan B. So in contrast to the Shah, who didn't want to use a lot of violence against people to stay in power, and both the Shah and all of his political and military elites, many of them were educated in the United States and Europe. They spoke foreign languages, and so they could remake their lives in Los Angeles or London. But the elites of the Islamic Republic and Ayatollah Khamenei himself have provincial backgrounds. They are not people who are worldly. This is a regime which is virtually friendless. It's longtime allies like the Assad regime in Syria, Maduro government in Venezuela. Those guys have been deposed or they're out. They have partnerships with countries like China and Russia, but those are not secure partnerships. And so for that reason, they have a kill or be killed mentality. And unfortunately, I wasn't terribly surprised that they were willing to employ that kind of brutality to stay in power, because what I say about this regime and Ayatollah Khamenei in particular is that they're homicidal, but they're not suicidal. What's paramount for them is to stay in power. And so that applies here when, and I don't want to preempt your questions, but as they're facing a potentially existential threat from the United States right now.
A minute and a half to the break, Kareem. What are the spectrum of collapses underway for the people who are actually just living there? They're not part of the regime. They're Persians, they're Iranians, just trying to get along. What are they confronted with right now? 1 minute.
So this is a regime which is politically, economically, and socially authoritarian. Every aspect of people's lives are disrupted because they're living under a totalitarian dictatorship that polices their personal lives. There's routine power outages, water shortages. And I think people are just so exhausted from this reality. It's the most sanctioned country in the world. And I think people are desperate for a transition from an ideological regime to a nation state, a government that prioritizes economic and national interests before revolutionary ideology.
I will be right back with Kareem Sadjapur of the Carnegie Endowment right after these messages. Please stay tuned. Kareem Sadjapur is the equal of any Iranian analyst in the United States. He is, of course, very, very much in demand right now, and I thank him for making time for the program today on the Salem News Channel and the Salem Radio Network. Kareem, can the regime, is it possible it would just collapse without outside pressure in the form of military force, given the spectrum of failures we talked about?
Anything is possible with these dictatorships, Hugh. There's an old line that all dictatorships look good until the last 5 minutes. And many of these authoritarian regimes that looked so strong before, collapse fairly abruptly. So it's my view that even if the United States doesn't take military action, this is a regime which is, this current status quo in Iran is not tenable.
So there's 150,000 members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, tens of thousands more in the Basij, their paramilitary, para-police thugs. What about the Iranian military, its ordinary military? Is it radicalized as well, or is it a military like the American military?
So the military is a conscript military, so it reflects Iranian society. I have one kind of personal anecdote about that. Years ago when I was living in Tehran, I went with a group of friends to the Caspian Sea, and I saw there was some military folks from the regular army, conscript army, who were just kind of walking along the shore of the Caspian Sea. And I initially kind of when you see military folks, especially Revolutionary Guards and Basij in Iran, especially back then, you would freeze and hesitate a little bit. And my friends kind of continued as they were, including a young woman who wasn't properly covering her hair. And I looked at them and they said, "No, don't worry about it. These guys are Kodemuni. They're one of us, from the army." So the way the Islamic Republic has managed the regular army is that obviously the top commanders have been handpicked by the regime. So up until now, they've always been loyal. But the body of that military are reflective of Iranian society at large, and I would suspect for the most part, deeply unsatisfied with the status quo, deeply unsatisfied with their lives.
So that takes me to my question about if there is military action, what should the United States target and what shouldn't they target? And I'll follow naturally. Should they leave the regular Iranian military alone?
Listen, I don't want to pretend to like I'm a military expert, and I obviously haven't. What we've learned from so many of U.S. military action over the last 2 decades in the Middle East, including in Iraq and Afghanistan, so much of it is the execution. And to our credit, to our military's credit, they've done an exceptionally good job oftentimes with execution. But on first the question of whether to target the regular army, it would seem to me that would be a bad idea because, as I mentioned, this is a conscript army for the most part and reflective of Iranian society. And you don't want anarchy. You don't want total disorder. We saw what happened in Iraq when the Ba'athist army was disbanded. And I think everyone fears that possibility of anarchy. So I think you would want the regular army to remain intact.
Would you want, if the United States strikes, what would you like them to strike in what order? I know you're not a military expert, but everybody is talking about this. Admiral Montgomery gave me a very long target list yesterday, but you're the fellow who studies the country. What do you think might bring regime collapse closer?
So let me say a couple of things to you. One is that one of the things I would have liked to have seen happen already, in fact, early days in the protests, would have been to lift this digital iron curtain that the regime has subjected people to. They've cut off internet, satellite connections, they've cut out cellular connections, and connectivity of the country has been about 1%. So they've slaughtered people in the dark. So to the extent we have capabilities, whether it's kinetic or cyber capabilities to tear down that digital iron wall, in my view, that's very, very important. Even if that means, for example, because the regime has their own intranet, their state television is functioning okay, their officials are doing TV interviews broadcast to the United States. And so in some ways, one option is to take out their intranet system, so then they have to plug into the system that everyone else uses. So that's one thing that I would have liked to have seen happen already. Second is, the organs of repression in Iran, whether that's command and control outposts of the Revolutionary Guards. I think that the Israelis will certainly want to target their missile stockpile, because Iran is a country which really can't control its own skies right now, and you would want to prevent them from replenishing their missile capacity. Then we start to get into much more sensitive questions, and obviously the most sensitive one, arguably, I think that the Trump administration is probably debating as we speak, is whether to target the supreme leader. And I've spoken to folks who served in the first Trump administration who are still close to this one, who believe that if military action is taken, they are likely to target the supreme leader, 86-year-old Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The only note of caution, and Hugh, I think that, I don't want to claim to speak for people inside Iran, but I think most protesters, those who took to the streets against the regime, welcome some kind of military action. The only note of caution I'd make, Hugh, is that we know historically that when authoritarian regimes collapse or when they transition, about 4 out of 5 times they unfortunately don't transition to democracy. About 4 out of 5 times they transition to another form of authoritarian regime. Soviet Union is a good example of that. We went from Soviet Union to Putin's Russia. The Iran of 1979 is a good example of that. We went from the Shah to the Islamic Republic. But so I'm not making the argument that military action can transition Iran to Denmark, but I think what people want to see, as I suggested from the outset, they want to see a government that is a national government that puts the economic and national interests of the nation first, not death to America and death to Israel. They want a government whose ethos is long live Iran.
So, Karim Sajapur, where do you place the probability now of a military strike by the United States on Iran? And do you have any fear that Iran will take a first preemptive strike on, for example, Israel in the Gulf oil fields in the GCC countries?
No, I'm skeptical that they will try to take preemptive action because, as I said, this is a regime which is homicidal, not suicidal. And right now, the United States has convened some of the most elite facets of the American military, whether that's warships or fighter jets, and I'm skeptical that they will want to test President Trump, given President Trump's history with Iran. You have to remember, Hugh, and you remember it better than anyone. 2018, Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal. 2020, he assassinated Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top military commander. Last summer, he dropped bunker busters on Iran's nuclear program. And each of these cases, people feared that it could be World War III. And in each of these cases, I think President Trump feels that his decisions were vindicated. So I don't think he fears Iran, especially now that they don't control their own skies. He thinks they're a paper tiger. So I would argue that the likelihood of him acting again, I would say, is perhaps 6, 7 out of 10.
All right, I'll be right back with Karim Sajapur. Don't go anywhere, America. Very rare you get an expert like this, so listen very closely to what he has to say. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Spending this hour with Karim Sajapur. He's a first-generation American. His parents emigrated from Iran 10 years before the revolution, and he knows the diaspora, and he studies this at the Carnegie Endowment. He's much in demand right now, and I appreciate the time. Karim, Iran only hard currency comes from oil. It is exported from Karj Island and from 2 other oil terminals. There's a debate among people that I read and listen to as to whether or not the United States and its allies ought to target those facilities in order to impoverish the IRGC and the Ayatollah and his cronies. What do you think?
My sense, Hugh, is, and the president has alluded to this, that the kind of template or strategy they have in mind is similar to the Venezuela playbook, which was essentially economic stranglehold and, going after oil exports, going after these ghost fleets of oil ships. And my sense is that is a more likely outcome than going after bombing Iranian oil installations or refineries, which could cause real economic devastation to the population. But obviously, in the Venezuela strategy, that strategy of economic stranglehold was a prelude to what became a political decapitation. And I do think that based on what the president has said publicly about Ayatollah Khamenei, calling him a sick man, Ayatollah Khamenei, we know from FBI statements that Iran had been trying to assassinate President Trump during the tenure of President Biden. And so, my sense is that you will see more likely this kind of major economic stranglehold and the hopes that will lead to either Iran capitulating or some kind of action to force political change in Iran.
Now, Karim, after 30 to 40,000 people have been mowed down in the streets and the besieged and the Revolutionary Guard are going through the hospitals and shooting people and the bodies are left on the sidewalk. What little video we have is horrific that's gotten out. Is it even fair to expect the Iranian street to rise up a second time after that kind of a devastating blow from the regime?
It's not likely in the immediate term because people are in retreat. They're just in shock. And as I mentioned from the outset, their communication ability is very limited given how the regime has throttled the internet and satellite television and cellular communication. And so I think they're in retreat. But as I point out to people, Hugh, the 1979 revolution was a 13-month process. It essentially began in January 78, and Khomeini didn't arrive in Tehran until February 1979. And so we're only really 1 month into this process. And it's strongly my view that whatever the United States chooses to do, Iran is a country on the cusp of some kind of transformation. Because as I said, not only the society has realized, but even within the regime, they've realized that this status quo is not tenable.
Karim, how are they even eating? The commerce in and out of the country is down to nothing. The rial is worth nothing. I don't know what the farmers are doing. What are the reports you're able to get on the quality of life for the average lower to low class individual in terms of income? It must be horrific.
It is horrific because the middle class has been totally decimated. The currency has been totally decimated, and it's there's no rock bottom. It keeps sinking. I'm sure others have pointed out in your show that the Iranian currency vis-a-vis the US dollar is depreciated something like 99.9% from 1979 to the present. So people are scraping to get by. And what we oftentimes see, Hugh, is only what's happening in Tehran. But, perhaps only a quarter or so of Iranians live in the capital. And I think both the economic devastation and the brutality is much greater in the places that we don't see with the same frequency as we see Tehran.
Last question before this break, and then one more question. Do the people believe any of the theology that the Ayatollahs put forward, Karim, or have they just view it as words?
I think it's very similar to late 80s Soviet Union, in which not only within the society, but within the regime, you have very few true believers left in the system. In fact, a friend of mine who was a professor in Tehran said, at the beginning of the revolution, the regime was 80% ideologues and 20% charlatans, and now it's the reverse. Only, perhaps even within the regime, only 20% true believers. So in society, I would say it's even less than that.
I'll be back with one more segment with Karim Sadjapur. You can follow him on X at K Sadjapur, and you can read him in The Atlantic. He's got a great new piece in The Current Atlantic, as well as at the Carnegie Endowment. Stay tuned. I wanted to save the most delicate issue for the last, Karim, which is the role of Israel in an incoming conflict between the United States and Iran. The National Security Advisor, the equivalent of the National Security Advisor in Iran, said, if there's any conflict with the United States, we're throwing everything we got at Israel. What do you expect their role to be? What do you want their role to be? Does their participation make it more or less difficult to topple the regime?
Well, Israel obviously showed over the last couple of years that militarily they're far superior to Iran, even though Iran is 75 times larger as a nation state. And so it was Israel which paved the way for the United States to take action because they took out Iran's air defenses. And going back to what I said earlier, Hugh, about restoring connectivity in Iran, if Israel, which has a very sophisticated cyber capability, if Israel was able to help restore connectivity within Iran, I think it's something that would be greatly appreciated. But they have, because they're within missile range of Iran and it's a much smaller country, things are much more delicate for them. And so that's among the many reasons why you have a huge U.S. presence now in the region, and everyone is on alert because ultimately Iranian missiles are not going to reach the U.S. homeland, but they could indeed go after Israel and cause some real damage.
So, Karim, to wrap this, everybody in D.C. talks to you about this. So I'm just curious, off the record, what did the other countries in the region, not named Israel and the United States, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, what do they want to see happen? Do they want this regime to stay there? It seems like it's an endless source of woes for a region that ought to be booming.
I think the only country, major country in the world which benefits from keeping the Islamic Republic around is Russia, because as long as Iran is isolated, it can't exploit its vast natural gas and oil reserves. It doesn't compete with Russia as it should in global energy markets. It's a thorn in the side of the United States. It can't compete with Russia in its historic sphere of influence, Central Asia. Obviously, smaller countries like North Korea like to keep it around as well. But the regional countries, I don't think any of them like the status quo of a country on their border that is so deeply ideological and destabilizing. But a lot of them, for various reasons, worry about conflict. They worry that they could be retaliated against in the case of our Gulf partners in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. A country like Turkey worries about chaos that could spill over refugees into their territory. So everyone is watching this very carefully. But I think most of those regional countries, if they could push a button and have a clean transition to a nationalist government in Iran rather than an ideological government in Iran, I think the vast majority of them would do that.
And is there any worry on your part that Iran has placed sleeper cells in the United States? They've sent people to assassinate people here before. They've tried to kill President Trump. We know that. But what about a widespread Hezbollah or related network? Have you got concerns there?
I'm not too worried about that in the United States. In Europe, they have carried out operations, and usually, Hugh, it's not Iranian nationals that are doing that. They pay European, Russian criminal gangs or Pakistani radicals to carry out these activities. So that is, certainly a possibility. But at the moment, I think that given how the noose is tightening around their neck, and as you mentioned from the outset, even the Europeans have proscribed them, the Revolutionary Guards, as a terrorist organization. I don't think their first instinct is to want to create even more problems for themselves.
Okay, very last question. What is the ceiling? We know it's hit rock bottom and they keep digging a hole into which they can fall off the floor. What's the ceiling for Iran if they were run by even a minimally competent nationalist government?
That's a wonderful question, and it is something which I think is obviously in the U.S. national interest. Kissinger once said there are few nations in the world with whom the United States has more common interests and less reason to quarrel than Iran. And it's my view that given Iran's enormous human capital, its enormous natural resources, its very rich history, this should be a G20 nation. It should be, Saudi Arabia, Turkey are G20 nations. Iran should be in that category. In 1978, Iran's GDP was around the same level as Spain and South Korea. And you see where those countries are now and where Iran is now. And it just shows you what a profound difference leadership makes. And I do believe that this country, once it has proper leadership, it could have one of the highest growth rates in the coming years.
And I have a bonus question. Does the United Nations contribute anything to Iran? Are they protecting world historic sites? Are they doing any kind of relief? Have they been any help at all in Iran?
Not terribly when it comes to the politics. Iran used to have a large Afghan refugee presence, and so United Nations, UNHCR was helpful there. And I do want to give a shout out to the new head of UNHCR, the former president of Iraq, Barham Saleh, who's a brilliant and wonderful guy. But to your question, Hugh, National Geographic magazine once called Iran the world's first superpower. And so there are amazing historic sites in Iran, and it will be, hopefully one day soon, a great destination for Western and American tourists.
I hope you are right. Kareem Saadjipour, thank you for joining me for this extended period of time. I'll continue to read and follow you on X. You can do that, by the way, America, at K. Saadjipour. You cannot miss it. And his new article in The Atlantic is not to be missed as well. One of those experts that you can really trust on everything having to do with Iran. Thank you, Kareem. I want to remind everyone, if you missed part of this interview, we will post it later at hughhewitt.com. It'll be over on YouTube as well. Salem News Channel may be replaying this later in the day. I'm not sure. You can always watch it on the Salem News Channel. Watch me on the Salem News Channel every day between 3 and 6 p.m. Sometimes we repeat, sometimes we don't. Also, I want to let you know that I'm on X at Hugh Hewitt. Also want to let you know I'm in the Relief Factor studio. I've got it here in my bag right here, and I tell you about it every day. Relief Factor Studio West. I have Relief Factor Studio inside of the icy beltway, as you heard about today. Relief Factor Studio up north is probably covered in snow. I'm very glad to be in Relief Factor Studio West. If you've got minor aches and pains, anything is bothering you, do not forget. You just have to take Relief Factor and give it a try. The 3-week starter pack is $19.95, less than $1 a day. The only supplement I've taken in more than 20 years. I've turned down so many different supplements who want to advertise on my show. I did one this weekend. Said, no, thank you. Relief Factor is all I need. 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF, or just visit their website, relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. We will post Kareem Sajapur everywhere at hughhewitt.com and wherever else you can find great videos. Yesterday in the final segment, I promised you a bit of Marco Rubio tape that had gone bad in our machine. I've reloaded it. This is from Secretary Rubio's testimony yesterday, cut number 11.
Benefits from NATO?
We do. I mean, the problem, but NATO needs to be reimagined as well in terms of the obligations. And this is not new to this president. Multiple presidents have complained about it.
I
think
agree.
this president just complains about it louder than other presidents.
Well, I'm just trying to be clear, get a clear answer on where this administration stands relative to NATO, because it's been a very fuzzy message over the last year. And do you agree that we're stronger in confronting China when we do so with like-minded partners, and that China is still the number one threat that we face in the United States?
Yeah, but our like-minded partners have to have capability, and that's been part of the problem, is the erosion in European defense capabilities, because they've taken vast amount of the monies that these are rich countries. And because of the NATO umbrella, it gave them the flexibility to spend a tremendous amount of their revenues on social programs and not on defense. Now, maybe that trend line will begin to change.
Well, it's already begun to change, frankly, and thanks. And I think the president deserves credit for that.
All right, so top, a Democrat gave the president credit for something. That's what I wanted you to hear. He's got NATO to spend more money. It was a really amazing thing. I want to tell you about andrewandtodd.com before I let you go. The Feds did not cut interest rates yesterday, but you may not have a choice about when and if you're moving into a house. So go to andrewandtodd.com, andrewandtodd.com, 888-888-1172. Or you may want to refinance. Andrew and Todd are with Union Home Mortgage. They are the bank. They underwrite the loan. They do it from soup to nuts. They take your application. They talk to you about your income. They help you document your income if you work for yourself. They help you get your credit rating as good as it can be. They get you the best kind of mortgage possible if you're buying a new house. They'll give you an approval letter, not just a qualification letter, but an approved loan. If you want to walk into an open house and say, here's my approved loan for the amount that I need plus my 5, 10, 15% down that I'm going to do, you'll work that out beforehand. I've known Andrew Del Rey for 20 plus years. I've known Todd Avakian for half as long. Andrew and I are in a Bible study that I make about every fourth week because we now do it by Zoom. But he's just a wonderful guy, as is Todd Avakian. They have helped thousands and thousands of listeners to the Hugh Hewitt Show, people who watch the Salem News Channel. They know what you need, and they're not trying to upsell you. You might need to refinance your house, even if you got a 3% loan, but you got too much credit card debt, too much student loan debt. You just need more money. You got something coming up, college, and even though it's 6% or 6.5%, you're going to give up that 3% loan in order to get that new loan. Or maybe you're a senior citizen, 62 years and older, living in the house that you've paid off. You want to get some equity out of it. AndrewandTodd.com. 888-888-1172. 888-888-1172. The very best thing to do is go to their website, andrewandtodd.com, answer a few questions. They or one of their teammates will be right back to you. They're wonderful professionals. They're extraordinary guys, and they will help you get a home no matter where you are in the United States, no matter where you're moving from. andrewandtodd.com.